All right, I think we're live. Welcome to the Merly End. I'm Dominic Machado, and I am joined by the man who wrote the book on Sri Lankan cricket, Nick Brookes. Nick, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Dom. I woke up to see Kamindu Mendis batting up a storm, and isn't the world just a better place when Pathum and Kamindu are scoring runs?
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about this on the show. Those guys are our two match winners. So tell me, you the morning seemed to me to be the best chance for Sri Lanka to push for a win, but they didn't quite get there. What did you think of how they added this morning apart from Kamindu?
Yeah, I thought Milan Ratnaka was going really well until he got out and playing a nice little supporting role. I mean, it's been a great test for him all round, right? He was again really stingy bowling in the second innings, which we'll get to. And I mean, you see the value of having a number eight who can hold up an end, right? Because as soon as his wicket fell, those last four or five went very quickly. I've got to say, I missed Dhananjaya and Kusal. I was still sleeping, so I've only seen replays of their dismissals. But I was really impressed by how proactive both Pathum and Kamindu were in this innings. And you look at the speed that they scored their runs, and it's kept all three results on the table. I was really struck, especially by Kamindu's play against spin, just by quite how much he moves his feet. I can hardly remember seeing a player sort of more proactive in terms of their movement, both getting out to the ball. It seemed like he was charging bowlers a lot, but also sitting back deep in his crease when they dropped slightly shorter.
Yeah, I think one thing that was interesting was I think it was Potham in an interview yesterday was saying that one of their goals for this test cycle is to up the run rate and be more aggressive. So it was interesting to see that they were actually trying to do that. They were trying to bat around fours, and that was really effective yesterday. And of course, kept Sri Lanka in the match. I think that was kind of key to doing it, and to see Kamindu being aggressive. So I like that sign of, okay, we're going to push the tempo. We're going to keep things going. I think as we saw, we want to see Kusal and DDS kind of get into those runs. Obviously, Kusal is coming off of the back of a good series against Australia, DDS less so. So those two guys clicking, excuse me, will be really important to actually seeing that through. I'm sorry, Nick. Yeah, because I think if they had scored, those two had batted on and kind of supported Kamindu, and it wasn't kind of a protective defensive operation from Milan Ratnayaka, who did look good. We might have been able to push 550, 600, and then we're talking about a very different thing here.
Yeah, totally. And I thought that actually that was what was going to happen after lunch, was that Milan and Kamindu would bat on and really up the ante, and that Sri Lanka would be bowling with a sort of 100-run lead and real pressure on Bangladesh. That didn't quite work out, but I think the way they went about it was really great, right? As you said, Dom, looking to score around fours. And I think actually getting 485 off 130 overs as they did was kind of more valuable than batting 2 and a bit days to score 600.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that was certainly a positive. What do you think of the pitch so far?
Unusual, right? It's not a typical Gaul surface. I've heard the commentators saying it's a bit harder. The thing that struck me about it today, it's still not really taking any more turn, but there's definitely some variable bounce coming into it, right? And balls that really lift. I thought the first wicket Prabha took got a bit of rise, and you see the way Milan's bowling very straight with that variable bounce. It's tricky, right? I guess you'd expect it to start to take a bit more turn tomorrow. I saw a couple of replays where it looked, like there was that real kind of puff of smoke, rumbly pitch. So interesting to see how it starts to play in the morning. Really interesting to see how Bangladesh approach things in the first session tomorrow, and whether Shanto is brave enough to say, let's try and maybe where's their lead now? 187. So, I mean, are they brave enough to say, let's try and add 70, 80 as fast as we can, and then give Sri Lanka a kind of achievable but awkward target in 2 and a bit sessions?
Yeah, I think that's the big question, is how does Bangladesh play this, right? Because all three results are currently on the table, I think. Sri Lanka could win if they bowl out Bangladesh quickly and then try to score runs. Bangladesh could win by scoring quickly and then trying to bowl Sri Lanka out. And of course, a draw is also very, very, very possible here. As we know, non-weather affected draws are extremely rare in this era's cricket. So who knows what's going to happen? Who knows how that's going to affect the way they play? And as you said, I think Shanto is going to be key as someone who's batting and has a sense of what the conditions are and how things are maybe changing. He's going to be key in terms of setting the tone and figuring out what works or what doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope they're bold, right? I don't mean this as a slight to Bangladesh, but they lose enough tests that the prospect of losing one here, which they were probably expected to from the outset, shouldn't massively upset them. So you'd think that they would go for broke when they've got an opportunity to try and win this game. And it could get really exciting, right? Because as we saw this afternoon, Sri Lanka's last 4 wickets can go very quickly.
Yeah.
So if they have, Sri Lanka sort of 3 down at tea, it makes for a spicy last session, right?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's on the other side of that is that Bangladesh also has quite a long tail right now. There's no Mehdi Hassan Mirage to kind of give you that back end firepower. And you get 3 wickets in the morning, you're maybe thinking of running through Bangladesh and chasing a total rather quickly, right? So I think both of those sort of the weak tails add an interesting element to this. How did you think, Nick, what were your thoughts on how Sri Lanka bowled today?
It was interesting, man. I think I'm a hard critic to please when it comes to Sri Lanka, because there were, I said there were times in the first innings when I was like, why isn't Prabha bowling all the time? There were times in this innings, I think when the 2 left-handers were in and Dhananjaya and Thurindu were operating and they weren't doing a lot, where I was saying, why isn't Prabha plugged in from one end, even as a left-arm spinner against 2 left-handers? I thought they bowled okay. I think Prabha really holds the key, right?
Yeah.
Thurindu didn't seem to be quite carrying the same level of threat. I would start with Prabha and Milan from the other end. And I think if Ratnayaka can bowl that stump-to-stump line with more variable bounce, he's going to be dangerous and he's going to keep things really tight. Mm-hmm. And then Prabha can attack from the other end.
And we have a question from Natalie Pereira. What happened to our spin bowlers here? And I think this is the question that everyone's asking. The Galdozer, Prabhat Jayasuriya, he's been fine, right? But not really threatening to take wickets. And I think there's a combination here, and Nick, you can correct me if you feel differently, of 2 things. One, it's a lack of inventiveness in terms of captaincy. How are you going to prize that wicket out? And there's also a lack of inventiveness, I think, from the bowlers. Prabha is kind of sticking on the same line and length. And if you're not getting turned, it's easy to defend or easy to clip into the leg side or offside for 1s and 2s, right? There's no pressure really put on the batters that way. So for me, it's a double combination of, 1, the captain isn't forcing the batters to do something, and 2, the bowlers, without any sort of semblance of turn, as Nick, you said, there is variable bounce, are really not troubling the batters with variations or changing their lines and lengths or doing something different. But that to me is the answer to Natalie's question. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also interesting. I wonder if you'll agree with what I'm going to say, Dom, is that I think DDS is a better captain for the pacers than he is for the spinners. Like today, when Milan was bowling, there seemed to be a plan, and he had a short silly mid off and silly mid on, and like that, just that one could pop up, and he's doing something right. And I think of the way that they kind of strangled Harry Brook outside the off stump last summer, which is strange because he bowls spin. You think that he'd have a better idea of how spinners can manufacture wickets, but there does seem to be a lot of the time when the spinners are bowling and it feels like Sri Lanka just drift into autopilot and they're expecting something to happen rather than creating it. I mean, I guess the other thing is that it's an unusually flat Gaul pitch. None of the bowlers have found it particularly easy to bowl on. And so there is that. But yeah, I think a bit more proactivity, a bit more creativity.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of Natalie is saying here. DDS's field setup is not attacking. I think certainly for the spinners, there's too many easy singles available. I think if the ball is not really ragging, you got to make them work for those singles. Put a little bit of pressure. There are a few run out chances, but I think you can creep those guys in maybe a foot or two more. Just make the Bangladeshi batters think for one more second about whether there's a run there or not. Hello kind of adds in the Bangladeshi spinners looked more threatening than the Sri Lankan spinners, and I think that's right. Thurinder Ratnayaka seems to have, as you said, Nick, when he bowls wicket to wicket, he's really, really, really troublesome, right? He's a very good bowler. He's someone who can force batters to play, but that sort of maybe fifth, sixth off stump line is not really doing it. And there's not enough in this pitch to make it do something. Maybe it's something where a tactical advantage can be gained from the fact that Thirindu bowls both off spin and slow left armers. And maybe you just switch it up every over just to confuse the batters a bit. Right. And maybe
he's
thinking about
very little left arm in this test, hasn't he? I remember, I think there was one spell on the first day, but that's the only time I can recall it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that he said, there was an interview with Andrew Fidel Fernando about Thirindu's approach. And he said that he felt that his off spin, the ball turning into the right-handers, was more dangerous than his slow left armers, which I thought was very interesting. And I don't know if it's related to the character of the pitch. He also said he set up plans specifically based off of the strengths and weaknesses of the Bangladeshi batters. So it seems like he's done the work, but at the same time, you got to be able to think on the fly, even if that's your plan. If it's not producing any results, you got to be willing to switch it up and change things up. The other aspect of this is in this search for the second spinner, I think we need, as fans and the coaches, also need to be patient, right? We saw Nishan Puris go after just 3 tests, right? And he had a couple of good performances. So you wonder with someone like Thirindu, does he feel the pressure that if he doesn't perform right now, is that curtains for him?
Yeah, man, there's a weight of expectation on Sri Lankan spinners, which is unfortunate, right?
Yeah.
And I think you have to look back. I mean, you only have to look back as far as Murali, right? Who, for the first 4 years of his career, was not the bowler who we saw by the mid to late noughties, right? He, spin bowling is the hardest skill in cricket to master. And everyone always says it, spinners are still learning their craft. Right through to their late 20s, early 30s. And I think it especially applies to Sri Lankan spinners who, will play club cricket on used pitches quite a lot, where the pitch does more of the work. And then you come onto a good test surface and you can look like you're still learning, like you're still figuring it out. So I do think we've got to be patient, got to give guys a chance and give them a long leash, right? Because we've seen it's been a procession of spin bowlers coming in and out of this team. No one's really stuck. And yeah, you think that, I'd rather Sri Lanka err on the side of caution rather than chopping and changing all the time.
Yeah. And this brings up, and we touched on this yesterday, Mark and I, the question of spin bowling coaching. Pial has been with the squad for, I think, 15 years. Is that right, Nick? Something like that.
Yeah,
and,
man.
It seems like he hasn't, almost every spinner that's come through, and I hate saying this, has gotten worse under his tutelage, right? And given the sort of spin royalty that exists in Sri Lanka, both Rangana Herath and Murali have taken up coaching gigs, right? They have coached and helped spinners all around the world. You'd think there are players we might want to, former players we might want to bring in to help the side. And, you know, in terms of mastering Gaul, if Gaul is going to be your fort, quite literally, the place where all your matches are played, why not ask the two masters of Gaul how to make things work? And Murley, again, was no stranger to bowling on good pitches where, you know, 500-600 was par, and he was still able to churn out wickets even when people scored runs. So what do you think about the potential of maybe making some changes in terms of spin bowling?
Yeah, I think that will be a positive thing. Poor old PL. I hope he doesn't watch the show because he doesn't have too many plaudits over here. But I think you're right to say, Dom, that there seems to be an unfortunate pattern of spinners getting into the Sri Lanka side and getting worse, right? We saw it with Embledenia. We saw it with what's he called, Praveen Jayawikrama. We saw it to an extent with Hasaranga. I mean, I don't think you can put all of this on PL. I think Ramesh Mendes is a slightly different case, right? Because he was a guy who turned big but struggled for that kind of consistency. But it doesn't look great when you have spinners coming into the team who you think are really young and really promising, and who 4 or 5 years down the line, you're saying, where's that guy gone? Or that guy's gotten considerably worse. I'd love to see Ranga working with Sri Lanka, because he's done consulting gigs with a lot of other countries, especially when they visit Sri Lanka. He's clearly a guy who's, you know, got a lot of knowledge. I think, you know, I think apart from Murley, no one's taken more test wickets than Ranga Herath in their 30s. You know, famously, it didn't come easy to him. He had to figure it out. He wasn't blessed with the same kind of natural attributes that Murley was. So I think he would be a great person to work with Sri Lanka's young spinners, because, you know, there's no shortage of talent on the island. It's just harnessing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Nick, you're right in terms of when Australia came over, who was helping them out? Ranganan. Whose spinners performed better in those 2 test matches at Gaul? Australia's spinners, right? So thinking about the fact that if Australia spinners can come to Sri Lanka and produce good performances on flat pitches, that's something our bowlers should be able to do. And here we might think, again, as you brought up, Nick, what are the pitches we're using for first-class cricket? And is it helping anyone when we reuse pitches and they're dust bowls and 150 is par? To focus a bit more on the bowling, Chamath had a really good comment here. Seems like we're missing the gas man dearly. Thoughts on Lahiru Kumara? And obviously it was injury that made space, that sort of led him to be left out of the side. But can you talk a little bit about what someone like Lahiru Kumara brings to a side like Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think just that extra pace, that kind of physical threat as well, right? That he can go short and batters don't love it, would have brought a lot, especially on a flat pitch like this where there's a bit of up and down and the other bowlers aren't getting a load. Asitha has been a bit down on pace, right? He's been high 120s, low 130s, when you really think that prime Asitha should be high 130s, right?
Pushing 140,
nudging 140. And I mean, I think it's shown, right? Asitha's got a lot of craft, but in that second innings, he didn't look especially threatening. I do think
didn't bowl very much either.
No, he's only bowled 8 overs. I think it's been a really good test for Milan. I keep saying it, but without the runs that he put on this morning, Sri Lanka could be staring down the barrel of losing this test. And he's been by far the most economical of the bowlers. I mean, you could say that he's bowled defensive lines, but I think those lines become more and more aggressive as the game goes on due to what's happening with the pitch.
I mean, and I think you're right with that. Like we absolutely need the defensive lines.
And I mean, that's like the thing is you don't drop Asitha, right? And Milan's been really useful. And I can't remember a test in recent memory where Sri Lanka have played 3 seamers at Gaul. would they be able to like get through the overs without a second frontline spinner? Because I mean, Kamindu's bowled one over, DDS hasn't bowled great, so it's a lot of it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, and this brings up Savina's question about what about making seam-friendly pitches. I think, Nick, you've laid out the big issue.
It's
Injuries are
how you get
real.
through.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you probably need a fourth seamer, right? If you're going to bowl, or you need someone like a prime Ange who can chip in with 10,
yeah,
15 overs. I also think that like it's easier said than done, right? Somewhere like Gaul, I don't know quite how you go about changing that into a seamer friendly wicket. I would love to see Sri Lanka play more tests at Asgiria because it's
yeah,
always offered a bit more for the seamers, and I guess that like slightly more hilly, cooler, that the ball might swing a bit more in candy and you
yeah,
can leave a bit more grass on the pitch, but financial constraints mean we're unlikely to see that in the recent future.
yeah.
So I think the choice you've got a goal is between kind of it being a road or it being a crumbly dirt track.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the SSC could potentially provide a middle ground, or at least maybe, creating conditions where the ball does swing and seam a bit early on.
Yeah, I mean, you could leave more grass on these
Yeah,
wickets, and then you'd think that you'd get some seam movement for like at least the first day.
yeah,
And that might be an interesting dynamic. I guess it makes things a bit more of a sort of Russian roulette.
yeah, exactly. And I think um, the question of why Kamindu didn't bowl more is interesting because they brought him on for, I think, what was it, the second or third to last over of the day, and he did seem to get a little bit of grip from the pitch. And obviously, SRH has thought him valuable enough, but just to change things up, right? I think DDS bowled a 7-over spell. Why not just bring in Kamindu for a few overs here and there and try something different? So I think that's, again, gets to the captaincy thing. How do we use resources? How do we create plans? How do we make something happen when nothing's going on? Because we saw that in England, there were some times where Sri Lanka was on top of the game, and then it just sort of petered out because the plans weren't there. Or I don't know if that's a mentality thing. I don't know if that's a coaching thing. I don't know if it's a preparation thing, but it's something they absolutely have to figure out.
Yeah, I totally agree, Dom. And I'd actually rather see Sri Lanka try things and it go wrong than watch them repeatedly let situations kind of drift.
Now, Ashin kind of is agreeing with our point here, right? They've had months to prepare for this series, but it seems like we lack the intent and look clueless when we get pushed in the corner. So, Nick, what do you think about that thought from Ashin there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's on the harsh side of things, but I don't totally disagree. I think that, this isn't the first time we're talking about this. We've
Yeah.
talked about it over time and time again. And I mean, this is a flat pitch, right? And
Yes.
but like Bangladesh's bowlers haven't found it easy either. But I think you would expect Sri Lanka to have had a bit more success than they have.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's right. I think I would say 50-50. So I do think actually they came in with a very clear strategy about how to bat and what they want from their batters in terms of test cricket, in terms of pushing the intent level high. And I think that's one of the positives we saw. At the same time, yeah, you think that they'd come in with plans, but again, we can't discount the pitch. If it's a flat pitch, there's only so much that you can do. And of course, there can be more inventiveness. But I think when you prepare a pitch like this, the plan is score big first and put pressure on the other side to get to those runs. But we lost the toss, right? So that's the risk in preparing a flatter pitch, is that the toss becomes so important, and the team that bats first has a massive advantage. And to some degree, we've kind of, by putting on 485 in such quick time, we've negated that advantage, and we have to take that as a positive.
Totally. And I
Yeah,
think if Sri Lanka batted first and put up 550, would Bangladesh have been able to respond in kind? You'd say perhaps not, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, Savina asks, should we should play more games in other grounds without going to Gaul for some time? Yeah, this brings up the big question, right? And I think Mark addressed this. There's the financials. Gaul, the first part of the financials is playing 2 tests in the same location is financially more viable. The second thing is that Gaul tends to be fairly cheap to host these tests. So again, that makes it fairly viable. But at the same time, I think that a tour against Bangladesh where you've got on the back end of it 6 white ball games, you shouldn't be too worried about losing money from switching venues or locations or having something different than Gaul. It would be interesting to ask Sanath and the management more broadly, why always Gaul apart from the financial reasons? Or is there anything apart from the financial reasons? Because, and Nick, you can maybe tell us about this, but there are many other pitches in Sri Lanka that have long histories of international cricket, of test level cricket. And I think we're quite frankly missing out on kind of the rich and diverse pitches that Sri Lanka does have to offer that you find when you say you go to India or you go to England or you go to Australia.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think diversity is the word that came into my head. As much as I love Gaul, I think it's the greatest ground in the world. Wouldn't it just be nice to see Sri Lanka on the road? I mean, playing the odd game at Asgiria, playing at the Pisara, playing at SSC.
Yeah.
It just brings more interest, right? And as you say, we get different types of pitches. The Pisara was famously, bouncy and quicker. I wonder if there's still this sense that Gaul is where Sri Lanka have the best chance of winning tests, because I'm sure the financial part is a factor, but how much more expensive is it to move everything 2 hours up the road to Colombo? I mean,
Right.
we're not talking about it's not huge, right? I do think it feels a little stale playing every test at Gaul, right?
I agree. And especially if you're not getting the results that you want, right? If they were coming in and crushing everybody at Gaul, fair enough, right? That's where you want to play. That's your home fortress. But it also kind of, I think people have asked about having seamer-friendly wickets. It kind of reduces some of the advantages you have from actually growing a really competitive seam bowling attack, right? A pace bowling attack that can do things in different conditions. And if you're saying, okay, well, we have to wait for our 2 tests in South Africa or our 2 tests in New Zealand to show that off, it's not really rewarding for players like Vishwa or for Asita or Lahiru Kumara. And then, if you're someone like Lahiru who happens to get injured, it's tough luck for you.
Yeah, totally agree. And I mean, Asitha seems fairly wasted in these home tests. Lahiru Kumara is always going to struggle to get a game at home, right? And you're right. Sri Lanka at the moment, you'd say, especially in red ball cricket, the stocks of seam bowlers are far stronger and far deeper than the stocks of spinners. But how do you get more than 2 into the side? It's really tricky, right? And as we saw, I keep going on about it. I know you shouldn't be picking your bowlers to bat, but Milan at number 8 does change the complexion of this team, and so it's a conundrum for Sri Lanka moving forward.
And
I guess the other thing to say is that they were on a pretty good run at Gaul up until the Australia series, right? And now, obviously, it's been 3 tests in a row which haven't quite gone to plan. We'll see how tomorrow goes, because this could still be a crazy win for Sri Lanka. But I wonder if this, if this series doesn't go the way they hoped and expected, whether that leads to a slight kind of, questions and potential change. Because I think the expectation was that Australia was always going to be hard.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. And, it is a good pitch at Gaul. I think we run the risk of saying yes, it's one dimensional, but this is a different type of pitch than we've seen in, say, 2018 or 2019, where the ball is turning from day one, right? And so you kind of have to expect, if you put aside, if the team chooses to bat first and scores big runs, right, that's to be expected. And a draw, yes, it's a draw against Bangladesh, but there's nothing we could really do to change that if it's, other than maybe scoring 600 runs in the time we scored 500 runs, which again is a big ask. So, Nick, I was going to say, actually, one comment before we get to it. Yes, so this is kind of, again, echoing what we're saying, right? If you make the toss that important, it's a very risky maneuver. And again, maybe how do you bring in seam conditions so that batting first isn't always the obvious option, right? If there's grass on the pitch, does that make that first hour or two a bit more tricky?
Yeah, I mean, I think that will be something interesting to trial at Gould, because, it always is going to flatten out and then eventually get crumbly, right? But it just means I'd be interested to see how many teams have won at Gould after losing the toss. I don't have these figures, but I imagine the correlation between winning the toss and winning the match will be pretty high.
Yeah. I think I want to say Australia did it once, but
that sounds about right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd certainly think that it's one of the grounds where the toss is like more important than, say at Old Trafford this morning, where it looked like kind of they could have gone either way.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then overhead conditions are playing a much bigger factor in whether you decide to bat or bowl first, and things of that nature. All right, well, Nick, before we wrap up, I want to get your prediction for tomorrow. What do you see happening?
I have no idea, but I think it's going to be really compulsive viewing. My instinct is that Bangladesh will declare sometime during the morning session. I would say probably closer to lunch than closer to start of play. Setting Sri Lanka something like 280, maybe, if they can get another 100 runs in the first hour and a half. Then it gives Sri Lanka, say, 65, 70 overs to bat with a target that is just tempting. They're just putting that hook in the water, right, and hoping that they catch a bite. I think it'll end in a draw, but I think it's going to be exciting right up until the final few overs. What do you think, Dom? I sadly, I think I edge towards a Bangladesh win slightly more likely than a Sri Lanka win.
Yeah, I think, well, I guess this is the way I would put it. I don't think a win is likely in either case, because I think if, Bangladesh declares and things go south, Sri Lanka is going to set up shop and just block it out. Alternatively, the scenario I'm imagining, let's imagine for a second the dream scenario, right? What happens, what you said happens in the first session happens. Bangladesh add another 100 runs. They declare at 280. Sri Lanka end that for the second session around, let's just say 100, 110 for two. And then Big Ange sends us home with a blazing display of sixes to get us a win, chasing 280 in his final test match. And then the comeback is on.
It's certainly not inconceivable, right? I think Pathum's going to be really important. You saw the way he batted in that first innings, just an absolute dream. And I think back to the Oval last summer, where England gave Sri Lanka what looked like a tricky chase, and he came out really positively, and they walked it in the end. So if he gets going, it's certainly not impossible. Because I also feel that, like, Shanto is going to have to be prepared to lose the game if he wants to win it,
yes,
right?
Absolutely.
If they're going to give themselves time to take wickets, they're going to have to declare probably slightly short of what they want to and leave that kind of tempting target. So it could be a really fascinating day. I was just chatting to a mate about how it looks likely that cricket's going to shift to 4-day tests. It's another kind of boost for 5-day tests, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's really true. Well, we can talk about that later, but it's troubling to see that idea of 4-day tests when, what happens when somebody scores 500 runs in the first innings in a 4-day test?
Yeah, exactly.
You just lose possibilities of what is actually going to happen. And yeah, it'll be really interesting. I think the calculation is going to be fascinating. And hey, you never know what can happen tomorrow morning if Sri Lanka run through Bangladesh quickly, right? You get a little spell like you did at the end of day 2, and maybe you're looking at a chase that's on and ready to go. And as you said, Potham is going to be key. I think the 3 key guys, if there is a chase, are going to be Potham, Kamindu, and Kusal, because they're the guys who provide that impetus. And I wonder if Sri Lanka want to be daring in a chase, if they maybe change the batting order a little bit. I remember, Kusal didn't score huge runs in the Old Trafford test, but he got a quick fire 38 or 39. I forget exactly, but that really set the stage for them to actually chase that total.
Yeah, you could definitely see Kusal or Kamindu coming in at 3 tomorrow, right? Or maybe even at 3 and 4, knowing that if they get out cheaply, you've got that depth of experience in Chandy, Ange, and DDS to hopefully anchor. I mean, also, as you say, Dom, if we come out tomorrow morning and Prabha can pick up a couple of wickets early, then it really changes the complexion, right? And then Bangladesh probably can't bat the way they want to try and set up a declaration. They're only 187 ahead. I mean, if Sri Lanka had taken a couple more wickets this evening, if they were 187 and 5 down, I'd say it's quite a different equation, right?
Yeah, it all depends on kind of that first. If you can get Shanto and Mushfiqur out in that first half an hour, that's basically what a Sri Lanka win hinges on.
Yeah, it slightly shifts the momentum, right? But no, it's I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. I might even set my alarm for 5:15 to catch the first ball.
Catch the first session. All right. Excellent. Well, we've been the Murley End. If you've listened and enjoyed, give us a like, follow, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everything. We'll be back tomorrow morning to give you the rundown on everything that happened on the 5th day, win, lose, or draw. We've been the Murley End. Thank you and bye.